Learning target. I can trace the flow of energy from the sun through various food chains and webs. The original source of energy in almost all food chains comes from the sun. So if you look at this simple food chain, you can see that the caterpillar is going to eat the grass or the leaf. The bird is going to eat the caterpillar, and the hawk is going to eat the smaller bird. Now, if you look, you'll notice your arrows is pointing in this direction. So what that means, your arrows represents the flow of energy. So in this case, energy is flowing from the leaf to the caterpillar. Caterpillar has to eat the leaf to get energy. Energy is flowing from the caterpillar to the bird, and then the bird is giving energy to the hawk. So your arrow represents the flow of energy. Now if you look at this, in order for the producer to be able to survive, or any plant to survive, it has to have the sun. So the sun is a key ingredient in photosynthesis. Without it, plants would not be able to survive. So in this case, and most cases, the sun is the original source of energy. Now if we look at this food pyramid, you can see that plants are the bottom. These are called your producers. Your primary consumer in this case is your insects. Your secondary consumer is frogs. And then your tertiary consumer is your hawk. Now, each level is going to pass on some energy. So your plants is going to give some energy to your insects. Once they've been eaten, your insects is going to give energy to your frogs because frogs eat the insects, and then your hawk is going to get some energy from the frogs because that's what the hawk's going to eat. Only 10% of energy is passed on to the other organisms. So let's say I started out with 100% energy with plants. Only 10% is going to be passed on to the insects. So that would be 10%. 10% of 100 is 10. Only 10% of that is going to be passed on to frogs. So what is 10% of 10? That's only 1%. And then only 10% of 1 is going to be passed on to the hawks. So that is 0.1%. So you can see only 10% of energy is passed on from one organism to another in a food chain. So you may be wondering what happens to the remaining 90% of energy that is not passed on to the organism. It's used in life processes. And when we say life processes, we mean things like movement. It's used to help the animal reproduce or organism reproduce. It's used to help it be aware of its surroundings. It's used for nutrition. Excretion, it's used to help it breathe and respirate, and it's used for growth. Now, what percentage of that 90 that is not used in life processes is going to be released as heat in the atmosphere? So anything not used to help that animal survive and reproduce is going to be released as heat in the atmosphere. So again, only 10% is passed on to organisms. Only 10% of energy is passed on. The 90% of energy is being used by the animal to help it survive and reproduce. Now, of that 90% that is not used to help it survive and reproduce, it's going to be released as heat into the atmosphere. All right, here is a food chain. I'm sure you have seen something like this. You can see that your primary producer or your producer is going to be at the bottom. That's your grass. Your rabbit, insect, and slug, that's going to be your primary consumer. So remember, a consumer has to eat another organism to get its energy. Producer can produce its own energy. Your secondary consumers are going to be these guys. And then your tertiary consumers is going to be your hawk and the fox. So remember, if we look at the bottom and we start out with 100%, The grass is going to use 100%. Only 10% is passed on to my primary consumers. So only 10% of 100 is passed on. Only 10% of that is going to be passed on to my secondary. So they are only going to get 1% from the rabbit, insect, and the slug. And then only 10% of that is passed on to my tertiary consumers. So they will only get 0.1% from eating the secondary consumers. Now, if we look at this and I ask you the question, which organism would affect the population the most if it were to become extinct or be eliminated? And the answer to that is going to be your producers. So if I were to take out the grass in this situation, the rabbit, the insect, and the slug would all eventually die off and become extinct. Now, if those were to die off, so if those were to be eliminated, then my frog, my vole, and my thrush would also be eliminated because that's their food source. So they're eventually going to become extinct. And then my fox and my hawk is not going to have anything to eat to get energy, so they are going to eventually become extinct. So the single most important is going to be your producer, which is the grass. Now, let's say that what's going to happen if I were to eliminate the hawk? Well, not a whole lot because nothing is relying on the hawk as a food source. Now, your secondary consumers may start to increase in population because they have less predators, but not a whole lot is going to happen because the hawk is not providing a food source for any other organism in this food chain. Now, what would happen if I were to eliminate the insect? So if I eliminate the insect, the frog, that's the frog's only source of food, so the frog would be eliminated. That's the vole's only source of food, so it would be eliminated. Now the thrush would still survive because it also eats the slugs, so it's getting some energy from eating the slugs. So you can see how this works. If I eliminate a food source from an organism, then that organism is going to